I'm John Adams, Sunday school teacher, men's class number 7. Today I'll be discussing a lesson for October the 11th, 2020. The title of the lesson is Love Your Enemies. The printed text is Luke 6:27 through 36. Again, let me start by giving some background information before discussing this printed text. Luke, the author of our printed text, gives his account of what has been traditionally called the Sermon on the Plain. Some scholars consider Luke's account to be the same occasion and teaching recorded in Matthew 5 through 7, the Sermon on the Mount. On the other hand, other scholars consider them to be similar teachings given on different occasions. Regardless of which position is correct, we can be certain that Jesus is continuing to carry on his teaching, preaching, and healing ministry. In Luke 6:1 through 11, Jesus is confronted with a controversy over the Sabbath, brought about by his constant nemesis, the Pharisees. Then one day soon afterwards, Jesus had come to a rather significant moment in his life and ministry. At this crucial moment of decision, Jesus did what we should all do. He prayed. He got alone with God in deep prayer. Not only was he alone with God, but he was long with God. Luke 6:12 says he prayed all night long. Then Luke 6:13 through 16 then tells us that he chose his 12 disciples. My first key point says, make your decisions after prayer, not before prayer. Luke 6:17 reads, he came down with them and stood in the plain in the company of his disciples and a great multitude out of all of Judea and Jerusalem. This verse informs us of who Jesus' audience was for this great sermon, the 12 disciples and many people from all around the area. Now, in a large multitude of people, you'll find a large multitude of problems. Luke 6:17 and 18 says that they had diseases and they were possessed with demons. However, they were blessed and benefited because whatever their problem was, Jesus had enough power to solve it. Luke 6:19 tells us that Jesus healed them all. My next key point says, bring it to Jesus. He can work it out. Now, when Jesus opened his mouth to speak, verse 20 says that he lifted up his eyes on his disciples. That's because the disciples were the primary audience for what Jesus had to say. Other people were present, but they were overhearing a message that was directed at Jesus' followers, but not them. Jesus' agenda was to teach a set of rules and instructions that would govern the behavior of his disciples and all his followers. So his aim then was to present the way of righteous living to those who are in God's family and would be a part of the kingdom of God. In Luke 6:20 to 26, Jesus opens his Sermon on the Plain by giving 4 blessings followed by 4 woes. And that gets us to our printed text. And the title of our first outline is God's people are called to live a distinctive lifestyle. Luke 6:27 through 30. 27 and 28 reads, but I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. Now, there are 2 words in the A clause of verse 27 that are key to understanding Jesus' thought process here. He has a large audience gathered around him as he teaches his disciples. The first key word is hear. He expects that the one who hears not only is capable of making out audible words, but hearing with understanding and hearing with an intention to obey. Our printed text starts with but, another key word here. This conjunction causes us to expect a contrast, and there is a contrast. The word but is actually pointing back to Jesus' statements in verse 22, where he gives the last of a set of blessings. In verse 22, he says in parts, blessed are ye when men shall hate you. However, in verse 27, Jesus says, but I say, love your enemies. The contrast then is Jesus' insistence that his followers respond with love to the hate that they receive from others. While it is understandable and justifiable to reciprocate hate with hatred, Jesus teaches them to reciprocate hatred with love. The other contrast here is highlighted by the fact that Jesus knew that the Mosaic law did not demand the type of response he's teaching. In Exodus 21:24, says eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. This is actually what's called the law of retaliation. It provided exact justice, not revenge. It concerned public justice, not private vengeance. But Jesus' desire was to show them that true righteousness exceeds what the law demands. The type of love that Jesus is referring to here is not a feeling, nor is it an emotion. It is more of an action. So in the first outline of our printed text, Jesus gives 8 different actions that are expected of his followers. The first 4 demonstrate love in action and love in speech. Here, love means to do good, to bless, and to pray for your enemies. Your enemies are those who hate you, those who curse you, and those who abuse you. It's easy for believers to return curses for curses or to retaliate for the abuse they suffered. Instead, Jesus calls us to do the opposite. Bless those who curse you and offer up prayers for those who take advantage of you. My next key point says, don't reciprocate hate with hate, reciprocate hate with love. In the next 2 verses, 29 and 30, we're given illustrations of concrete examples of responses to mistreatment. In verse 29, Jesus commands us to offer the other cheek. A disciple of Jesus should also offer the other cheek after being struck on the one cheek. And we're also told here to refuse retaliation against extortion. Now, is Jesus telling us to stand still and accept abuse or theft or extortion? No. The point of offering the other cheek is not about being hit again. Jesus is teaching us to respond with tolerance and not retaliation. The response to those who seek to abuse and humiliate us is to love, bless, do good, and pray. But Jesus doesn't just command us to do these things. He modeled these things himself, and he lived these examples. Remember, he was tried unjustly. He was beaten unmercifully. He was stripped of his clothes, and he was crucified. And his response to all this was to say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Of course, it's not in our nature to endure this kind of treatment. But Jesus' standards are not based on what we do and feel naturally. Instead, his standards are based on God's character and conduct. In verse 30, Jesus moves from discussing extortion and abuse to the negative actions of neighbors or friends. He admonishes us to give to any man that asks from us. This points out how followers of Christ are not to be stingy with our possessions. Remember, they are not ours to begin with. We are only stewards of what's been entrusted into our hands. Now, instead of being stingy, we should trust God's provision enough to not always expect to be repaid for what we give. My next key point says, loving your enemies means living a life of love. Our second outline is entitled, Jesus' Strategy, Luke 6:31. And while the first outline describes specific behaviors that characterize the kingdom Jesus had come to establish, the next 6 verses discuss the motives for those behaviors. Verse 31 is considered the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Whatever treatment you love to receive from other people, you should also desire to give to others. The phrase ye would here expresses a desire or a wish. My next key point says, what you wish for yourself is what you should wish for others. Now, third outline is entitled, The Total Unselfishness of Love, Luke 6:32-36. And in verses 32 to 34, Jesus makes the same point in 3 different ways as he teaches unconditional love. Jesus' point is that concern for others should not be motivated by whether or not a person can reciprocate that love. His followers are expected to go beyond the normal standard. The normal standard expects to receive something of equal or greater value each time something is given. In order to counter that thinking, he asked the same question three different times. What think have you? In other words, do you think you deserve credit for being generous only to people you think can return your kindness? So in each of these three verses, Jesus indicates that people who think in that fashion are behaving like sinners. That's because sinners show acts of love to people that they believe can pay them back. The sinner's giving is motivated by the payback that he expects to receive from the person to whom he gives. They love only those that love them. They do good only to those that do good to them. And they only lend to those that can repay. But Jesus' point is to define generosity in a new way and encourage the growth of relationships through concern for our neighbors and friends. We're expected to love, to give, to do good, without expectation of always receiving a return. Now look again at the question Jesus posed 3 different times. What think have you? I want to take note of the word think in that phrase. Here think is translated grace, which indicates favor or benefit. We can show grace by loving people who can't return that favor. The point of showing grace is it cannot be repaid. God has shown us an abundance of grace and favor. Of course, we can never ever expect to repay him for the grace that he's shown us. Verse 35 then is a kind of summary statement for the entire printed text. Jesus commands us to love, to do good, and to give without hope of receiving anything in return. So in essence, we see he repeats the main themes, and he also again emphasizes action. But he gives a different motive for the actions of his followers. Genuine Christian love does not seek any benefit down here on earth. But Jesus reminds us that we will receive a reward up there in heaven. The word reward means wages or pay received later for services. Since we consider ourselves to be servants, we are to render service until the day we die. Jesus tells us that we will receive a great reward for that service. Not only will we receive a great reward, we will also receive a great designation and a great recognition. We will be designated as children of God because of our faith in him. And we will be recognized for demonstrating the same character that God does. God's character is demonstrated in our loving our enemies as well as being kind to those who are ungrateful and those who are evil. Now verse 36, the last verse of our printed text, ends with another summary statement. Jesus' point in verse 35 can be summarized by saying that God is merciful. Since we are his children, verse 36 reminds us that we are to act godly and show mercy towards the others just like he does. Whenever we desire to seek revenge against someone that has done us evil to us or done us wrong, Jesus urges us to be merciful to him. Mercy is another characteristic of God that Jesus admonishes us to demonstrate in our lives. In Matthew 5 and 7 from the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." Now, in conclusion, I know this passage is a difficult lesson to put into practice, and I want to share 3 quick thoughts about it. And I realize that it goes against all the fundamentals of human nature, and that makes it unrealistic and uncomfortable for so many people. But my first closing thought says, our comfort is not God's concern. While God certainly loves us and cares for us, his word and his commands are not intended to make us comfortable. His word is intended to transform us and conform us into the image of Christ. My next closing thought says, our goal is God's glory. Instead of being comfortable, our main goal should be to glorify God in all that we do. And that's the main reason we were created, to honor him, to praise him, and to glorify him. My last closing thought says, our best choice is to let go and let God. In life, we will inevitably endure conflicts, confrontation, disappointments, disagreements, and even abuse from others. We become disappointed, bitter, and even hold grudges. On many occasions, these situations are beyond our control, but we can always choose how we respond to them. The best way to respond is to put it into the hands of the Lord. Let it go and allow God to take care of it for you. He will repay in the proper time and in the proper manner. Let me remind you what Romans 12:19 says. Dearly beloved, Avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Thank you. May God bless you and keep you.